Thank you, Boli. I
Thank you,
must
sir.
thank UNICEF and NNF and the governments of Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Karnataka, and Odisha to have invited me for this nice program of mentoring of SNCU pediatricians and other medical officers. So, without much ado, I'm going to be talking today on what is called the first golden hour of care of babies, particularly in relation to premature babies. We all know that the incidence of prematurity is increasing. More and more, we are seeing close to about 13 to 15% of babies in this country are being born premature, whether they're late premature babies or moderately premature babies or extremely premature babies. Nevertheless, the incidence is increasing. So, what has happened is the first 1 hour of the treatment practices which we need to follow is the most important when we look after premature babies. This whole 1 hour period is now called the golden hour time. Can you see my slides, please, Aboli?
Yes, sir. We can
Okay,
see
I'll
you.
just switch to slideshow. So, just one second. Mm, yeah. So, yeah, so under this project of the NNF and UNICEF and online training and mentoring, we are going to be talking about this golden hour. So what is this golden hour? We all know that if the correct treatment is done, for adults especially, this whole concept started off with the terminology called golden hour management for adult critical care when adults had to be treated for trauma. So the short term and long term injuries would happen to be best managed if in the first golden hour after the onslaught of the injury was to be managed appropriately. So there are a lot of complex decisions and a whole lot of team has to coordinatedly think in the same way and start the treatments for the first 1 hour of reviving a patient who's had trauma. So this was the concept called golden hour, which was initially coined for children and adults falling prey to trauma. The same thing is now, in the last few years, being extended to the care of the babies, especially premature babies, in the first golden hour when they are born. We are looking at evidence-based, systematized, very definitive treatment modules to be done along with the efficiency of the whole team looks after everybody knows what to do for that baby in the first golden hour and along with a good lot of communication amongst the team members and amongst the caregivers along with the parents of the baby right in the delivery room this golden hour is now practiced. So the whole concept of golden hour has been in existence for the last about 7 to 8 years, ever since Dr. Myra Wycroft suggested that it's basically a philosophical approach. We are just trying to bundle in lots of things which we know need to do for a baby to be able to give the best possible care in the first 1 hour after the baby is born so that both the immediate outcome is good and the long-term outcome is good. These basically bundle up a lot of evidence-based protocols and procedures which are standardized and there's a lot of coordination required to look after these babies. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 35 to 40 minutes or so. I realize that many of you are working in level 2 centers and some of you are working in SNCUs which are able to do tertiary care. You may be even ventilating babies and giving surfactant. But since it's a very heterogeneous audience today, including maybe some medical officers and nurses and including trainees doing DM and DNB neonatology, I'm going to give a holistic picture of this golden hour module, which we are proposing from the NNF. We all know that premature babies are prone to hypothermia. So this is something we have to address at the time of birth. There's no doubt about it. And we all know the reason for that, because babies have an immature skin, they have a very, very thin epidermal barrier, they have less fat in their body, there's increased body surface to mass ratio, and they have very poor thermogenesis. So as a result of which, temperature management becomes a very utmost important criteria in the first golden hour management. We have to become very sensitive to that. The second thing we know is nutritionally, these babies are already deprived. They're already born with less reserves. So as soon as the baby is born in the next 1 hour or 2 hours, they're prone to get hypoglycemic, which can be detrimental to their brain and also increases morbidity and mortality in them. So you have to be aware of this. The third thing, whatever treatments we do at that time can affect the baby in the long term also. For example, if you give too much oxygen, which is not desired for the child can develop lung injury, what we call chronic lung injury can happen. Retinopathy of prematurity can happen. So this is another thing we have to look at evidence and see what is appropriately to be done, has to be done for the child. We all know that premature babies have weak chest muscles, their respiratory drive is poor, so therefore they are not able to breathe well because their lungs are also deficient in surfactant. So giving them good oxygenation, getting rid of their carbon dioxide, or that means adequate ventilation also becomes a priority when the baby is born. You may also need to remember that because they have a very poor respiratory drive because of their immaturity of the CNS, they may not breathe well at birth. So this is another thing. So you see, already there are 5 or 6 important things you have to look at when the baby is born. In addition, as I mentioned, there's lung deficiency of surfactant. So the lungs may just not open out at all. So oxygenation and gas exchange may not happen easily when these babies are born. There is increased risk of infection. So because they are immunocompromised as a host, and whatever activities you do at the time of birth, you have to be very careful that strict asepsis is maintained so that we don't introduce any further infection to these babies. Whatever you do, especially in the small babies, they have a high chance of developing intracranial hemorrhages because they have very fragile blood vessels in their brain capillaries. So sometimes sudden hypoxic episodes or sudden problems in their blood pressures or something which you've not been able to address that can lead to higher incidence of intracranial hemorrhages. So you have to be gentle with these babies, at the same time effectively resuscitate these babies when they are born. That is the whole crux of the matter. Also, these babies may have excessive hypovolemia and shock when they are born. This is well known, and you need to therefore, and they may even have blood loss. For example, there may be a mother who delivers with antepartum hemorrhage, and suddenly there's so much of blood loss and the baby comes out compromised with severe hypovolemia. So you have to look into this. So you got to look after nearly about 10 different problems in these babies when they are born premature. And all these things have to be tackled at the same time in the first golden hour so that the subsequent course of the disease of the child is better. The child recovers well from this through intensive care and then goes on to become a normal child. So there's a lot of team effort which is required here to prevent hypothermia. The other thing which I'll be talking to you about is trying to find evidence to show that delaying the cord clamping is better in these babies. So that's something you have to look into when the baby is born. You have to be effectively and gently resuscitate these babies when born without causing lung injury or oxygen toxicity. Safely stabilize the child and then transport to the neonatal unit, the SNC or the NICU, wherever you're working. Or if it is somewhere else, you have to transport to another hospital. You have to do that optimally, where subsequent cares can be delivered. And all this, while you're doing, you have to be communicating very, very effectively with the parents so that they are in the picture all the time and they are in the loop about any decisions you're taking with the child, because this is going to affect the child and the family long term as well. Whatever decisions you take, it has to be supported by the family and communication has to be good. So these are the parameters which I'm going to discuss one by one in the next few minutes. If you have an imminent premature baby going to deliver, based on the gestation which you are expecting to deliver, you will have to modify your counseling according to that. Gestations about 28 weeks and above is probably good outcomes seen in this country. Most of the neonatal units and most of the special SNCUs, we are able to see good outcome. So maybe you will have to address these concerns about the various problems likely to happen to the baby, and you need to form counseling as a very important aspect. So this will happen even before the baby is going to deliver. Extremes of gestational age, limits of viability, peri-viable ages are a different type of counseling probably. And of course, this session today is not about counseling, but then I'm sure many of you are very serious senior neonatologists who are quite experienced in counseling at different gestations, and you would probably be able to address these concerns based on the kind of setup in which you work and what are the outcomes you have been looking at and what are the expectations you can give to the parents. Apart from the initial counseling and trying to get to know the parents, especially the mother before she is taken in for the delivery or a cesarean section, you would also need to make a good equipment check, which all of us know as per NRP, we would do that. A team briefing is required. Roles have to be assigned. Typically, if it's an imminent premature baby delivery, we would request at least 2 neonatal team members to be there to be able to actively resuscitate this baby. And the other thing is making sure, because this baby, as I said earlier, is likely to become hypothermic very soon as born. So you will need to make sure that the delivery room ambient temperature is set to the most desired for this baby. So even in a situation where it's a very cold atmosphere, or even if it's a very hot atmosphere, where caregivers may want to probably not keep the temperature warm, it's desirable that we should keep the environmental temperature about 26 degrees centigrade or so. So you need to keep the environment temperature around that time. Now, the other aspects you may have to think about, which I'm going to talk about, is you will have to sensitize the obstetric team about the delayed cord clamping, and some kind of a plan has to be kept in mind for that. Delayed cord clamping is very good, especially the baby is coming out well, is not really needing any active resuscitation. Maybe you should give the benefits of delayed cord clamping. I'll come more to that later. There are two equipment, which I think in today's era, we should insist on and have in our neonatal units. One is a blender where oxygen and air can be well blended, and you will exactly know what is the oxygen concentration or the FiO2 you need to give to the baby. Typically, premature babies, we would need to start resuscitation between FiO2s of 21 to 30% and modify it according to the oxygen saturation of the baby, which I'll come to in the next few minutes. The other thing is, gone are the days when we give unregulated pressures to babies because of the worries about lung injury. So we would need to ideally use what's called a T-piece resuscitator, which is the picture shown here, where you can see that you can deliver a very, very clearly.
People want hospital to be a hotel.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm not able to hear. Sorry. Can we have somebody muted, please?
Now, can you hear, sir? Hello. Sir, you can go ahead. There's no more noise from the background. Dr. Karthik, sir, are you able to hear me? Karthik, sir? Yes, sir. Please talk. We can hear you.
Yeah. So what I was going to insist upon is, see, wherever possible, if the funding is possible, we should get what is called a T-piece resuscitator. This is the device shown here, which is able to deliver a predefined pressure to the baby, which is, you can set the PIP which you want to deliver and the PEEP which you want to deliver. Because of this, you can be rest assured when you're actively resuscitating a baby, excessive pressures will not likely get delivered to the baby, and therefore the risk of lung injury becomes less. Of course, as per the current NRP and the older NRP guidelines, the use of drugs for uh, further drugs apart from adrenaline are not really advocated. So we would also be very careful about the use of cardiac compression. There are very clear guidelines about it, which I'll share with you. Now, the first thing which we all talked about was how are we going to look after these babies' temperature? We all know they have less brown fat, their transepidermal water losses are likely to be high, and they have decreased glycogen stores. So the thermal strategies, as I mentioned earlier, is to keep the ambient temperature, even about 15 to 20 minutes before the delivery, you can keep the ambient temperature around the baby around 26 degrees centigrade. That will be very ideal. Even up to 28 to 30 degrees centigrade is good. You should arrange to keep some polythene wraps, which are easy to obtain. These are the wraps in which the baby can be wrapped up soon as the baby delivers. You don't even have to wipe the baby because the baby is in the mother's environment. So the liquor is at the mother's temperature. So when the baby comes to you, immediately if you were to wrap up the baby in a polythene wrap like that, you would be probably preventing heat loss from the baby, and the baby can be kept under a pre-warmed warmer. This wrap can be kept as a cap also. A small cap can be kept on the head of the baby made of polythene, or even woolen caps are fine. Some units would also have some activated thermal mattresses, which are basically based out of phase change materials. You can use them if required, so that from above there's a preheated warmer, and from below also there's a thermal mattress for the baby available. A good room heater or a warmer, which is a blow air warmer, hot air warmer like this, will be a very good addendum in the resuscitation corner of the labor room, wherever you're going to do that. A good room thermometer is always an addendum if you can have, especially for if you have a unit where lots of premature babies are delivering and you have a unit where it's very cold, especially during the winter nights. Temperature of the body of the baby should be monitored soon as possible. So most of the warmers you would have in your SNCUs have a temperature probe which can be instantly connected to the baby soon as the baby delivers. You can keep the probe on the anterior abdominal wall for the baby, and that temperature can be continuously monitored. Now, the target temperature for the baby may be about 36.5 degrees centigrade. Now, if the baby delivers out in a good condition and the child is actively crying vigorously and you really feel there's not much active resuscitation which is immediately required. For example, the baby is not apneic, limp, or needs active resuscitation, you can wait. You can easily tell the obstetrician to wait to cut the cord. You can delay the cord clamping by as much as up to 30 to 60 seconds. 60 seconds is even better. The increase in circulating blood volume, therefore, which goes to the baby, helps the baby need lesser blood transfusion subsequently. There is better systemic blood pressures in the baby. There is a reduced risk for inotropic support. The transition of the baby into neonatal circulation becomes faster. So placental to neonatal circulation becomes much better. There is increased in left ventricular output, which has been recorded. This is all mind you evidence-based data which is available. There is improved cerebral oxygenation also, which helps in that. And yes, two important things data has suggested, that the incidence of intracranial hemorrhages comes down and the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis also comes down. So you look at all these, there are about 10, 12 benefits of just delaying the cord clamping. So I think we should promote this as much as is possible. Devices are now available in the medical industry now, even in India, where without having to compromise on the baby's temperature maintenance soon after birth and trying to promote cord clamping, you can have a baby kept as near to the mother as possible, and you can do the rest of the treatments for the baby, and the 60 seconds benefit of delayed cord clamping you can give to the baby. This is something we should all promote. Now, if you were going to have information received to you that there's going to be an immediate delivery of a preterm and you are called for counseling, please do inquire the status of antenatal steroids. We all know that it's good for the baby's lungs. It reduces the chances of intracranial hemorrhage and necrotizing enterocolitis. Do ensure, or if you have been counseled, if you have been called to counsel even earlier than the baby's planned delivery, you can probably talk to the obstetricians and see how best to give antenatal steroids. Magnesium sulfate definitely has neuroprotective role, especially gestations less than 32 weeks. If you're looking after such babies, it's worthwhile giving them. Of course, you would have to look for any evidence suggestive of chorioamnionitis in the mother, maternal fever, leaking PV. It does have a bearing on the risk of infection in the baby and the risk of development of chronic lung disease in the baby and the severity of the respiratory distress syndrome. Apart from this, antepartum hemorrhage, of course, because the baby is likely to come out in a compromised condition, especially because of hypovolemic shock. So you would need to ask this question, or maybe one of your residents or you yourself, you're going to go and meet the obstetrician, you would need to ask all these questions. Now, in the recent ILCAW guidelines published last year in October, 4 pre-birth questions have become mandatory to be asked. The gestation, as we all definitely would need to ask, what is the gestation? Whether the amniotic fluid is clear or not, whether it's meconium stained or dirty, whatever. Any other risk factors, additionally, these are things which have a bearing on the baby's management at birth, and a plan for umbilical cord management has to be discussed with the obstetric team before they deliver the baby. Allocate roles amongst yourselves. You can have a team. One has to be a team leader looking and guiding the active resuscitation of this baby. You have to perform the equipment check with the NRP guidelines. All of you know, you have to have a preheated warmer, preferably. You arrange all these polythene bags, which are to be covering the baby as soon as the baby is born. Set the room temperature to 26 degrees Celsius. And of course, keep an incubator ready for transportation of this baby to the nursery or the SNCU, wherever after stabilization you want to transport to. Instructions to the delivering obstetrician in good communication, gentle handling would be something we would always insist. If it's possible, many times small babies are very difficult to extract because obstetricians find it very difficult sometimes during a cesarean section to extract. But whatever best is possible, because these babies have a lot of fragility and intracranial hemorrhages are high risk in these babies, the smaller and more premature they are. Avoid deep suctioning. So many babies, when they come out or the obstetrician is suctioning intrapartum, they can avoid doing this if it is possible. Many of them tend to do this. See if you can ask them to avoid doing it. As I mentioned earlier, we can tell them to delay cord clamping, especially if the baby is vigorous, even at least up to 30 seconds, preferably up to even 60 seconds. Now, you have 2 situations in a baby who delivers prematurely. One, the baby could be very vigorous at the time of birth. Let's presume the baby is about 32 weeks, come out crying and is really vigorous. You really don't think there's a rush to take the baby to the resuscitation table. So in this situation, you can even ask the obstetrician to start the cord clamping and give at least 60 seconds. You start counting 60 seconds, while of course you can parallelly try to put a polythene bag around the baby. And then after the cord clamping is over, now as I said, some devices are available where there's a radiant warmer which is next to the mother. You can keep the radiant warmer, and this equipment is now available where it gives warmth, and while the process of cord clamping is happening and is getting delayed, you can even do all the other cares for the baby next to the mother. You can, of course, set the temperature of the room. Earlier we have discussed this. You can see so that to stabilize the baby's airway, you can position the airway a bit. Suction may or may not be needed, but nevertheless, it is not disallowed. You can still do a gentle suctioning of the nose and nasopharynx and the oral airway so that the baby is able to breathe well. So once this is done, the baby comes to your resuscitation table. Now, before this, as I mentioned earlier, the equipment checks have kept you arranged for any active resuscitation. You have a TP's resuscitator, which is available with you. Ambu bags are avoidable as far as possible, or any self-inflating devices are avoidable. They cause more lung injury. We don't want them happening. They give very unregulated pressure, so we don't want them to be used. The TP's devices should be able to have a setting for setting the PEEP and the PIP. So typically premature babies will start with a PIP, positive airway pressure of 18 centimeters of water and a PEEP of about 5 centimeters of water. You should keep an air oxygen blender ready with a flow rate of about 5 liters per minute. If you have a blender ready, it can easily deliver 21 to 30%, and you can keep it ready to deliver a baby, to resuscitate a baby. You can start with 21% and upgrade to even up to 30% if the baby's oxygenation doesn't improve. Initially, as I said, if the baby has got a vigorous cry, good respiratory drive, you don't need to do. But on the other hand, if the baby comes out apneic, is very limp, heart rate is less than 100, and the baby is gasping, you would need to start what's called positive pressure ventilation. So this is what is the plan, which most of the times we would keep. And oxygen saturation devices are now easily available. You can keep them ready, and you can put it in the preductal area of the right hand. That is, the right hand is the preductal. Soon as the baby is delivered, you can probably keep the pulse oximeter ready and keep the saturation probe on the right palm of the baby and plan to this thing. So this is just a short video. What you would need to do. This is just giving positive pressure ventilation to a baby who develops respiratory distress soon after birth. You can see it is just kept tightly around the nose and mouth. A well-fitting mask is kept. And if you see the knob on the above the mask, that is the positive pressure knob, which is basically through the T-piece device. If all of you have been using the T-piece device, you'll understand if you turn the knob around, it is able to deliver even up to 5 to 8 centimeters of water pressure to the baby. So it's like a CPAP device kept onto the baby's nose and mouth, and that can deliver the desired FiO2 which you need to give. So while you're doing this, baby is no doubt getting the benefit of the lung getting expanded, the fluid from the lungs getting resorbed, and that is the T-piece device there, and that is the blender there. So these are all essential in terms of being ready, kept ready for delivering the baby who's going to be delivered premature. Now, if on the other hand, the baby who's spontaneously breathing has got more and more increased work of breathing and oxygenation is dipping, saturations are not reaching a target, even up to 5 minutes of more than 85%, and the heart rate is falling, then we would need to probably decide whether this child needs further treatments. Now, this is on the right side. If you see, this is the oxygen targets which are now available. Most of the data suggests that by the time the child is about 5 minutes, the target oxygen of 80 to 85% should be reached. But if you see, you don't have to fret. In the first minute after birth, the saturation targets are around 40 to 70%. So you're quite happy to achieve that. And by 3 minutes, it should reach about 75%. But then you start closely monitoring the heart. Now, the current guidelines in the NRP suggest that you should connect a heart rate monitor also if possible. But then if you auscultate the baby and you find the heart rates are less than 60, you would probably need, and the saturations are dipping, oxygenation is not improving, in spite of what is called the positive pressure ventilation which you are doing, you would probably need to endotracheally intubate these babies and then give intermittent positive pressure ventilation and PEEP. And on the device which you're ventilating with, that is a T-piece device, based with that, and along with the blender, you can titrate the FiO2, you can come down or increase. But then I have not, of course, planned to talk too much about NRP today, but nevertheless, suffice to say, most of you are quite aware of the NRP guidelines. Suffice to say that there's been a little change in the updated ILCOR guidelines on the dosage of epinephrine. It's become more simple to calculate. So maybe later during the discussion time, we can discuss this. So now coming to the next steps. So if the baby has to be intubated in the delivery room, it would be because respiratory distress is increasing and you're giving positive airway pressure through this mask, which is the CPAP. If it keeps on increasing to more than 7 centimeters of water and the FiO2 needed to maintain the saturation goes up to more than 40%, you would need to probably think whether the baby is needing intubation. Of course, if there's persistent apnea and there's a prolonged apnea especially, you would need to think, and the baby is getting bradycardic, you would probably need to intubate these babies. Now, if you were to look at a baby who's sick and therefore needs resuscitation, the standard of care is using a CPAP with a T-piece resuscitator device. That's the standard of care. In some babies who are bigger in weight, maybe gestationally more than 30 weeks or so, some people as a primary mode have tried what's called high flow nasal cannula, but it is still not proven to be more superior to CPAP. CPAP is still the best thing to do for babies at the time of birth. High flow nasal cannula may be subsequent to the baby requiring intensive care. You can use high flow nasal cannula, but the standard of care is still today what's called delivery room CPAP. Now, it's very important, and recently, yesterday only, we were discussing in our neonatal unit, the mask which you apply should not be very tight, but nevertheless, if it is tight and you want to get a good tight fit there, then you should give only intermittent positive pressure ventilation, what we call PPV. If you were to keep it tightly pressed and continuous sustained pressure, that is called sustained inflammation. That is not good for the babies. It's been clearly proven that if you do this for a prolonged period of 25 to 30 seconds, it increases the risk of air leak syndromes and pneumothorax and other complications and even the risk of death in babies. So that procedure called sustained inflammation should not be done. It's been given up. Trials have been done which show that that is not a good idea to do. So this is just a warning. So if you're going to do this, you should just have a gentle positive pressure ventilation to be done. And you can keep it going like that so that the breath rates you give to the baby may be 30 to 40 per minute or so. Now, in the babies who require resuscitation, the baby has come out apneic, limp, bradycardic, you don't necessarily have to go for delayed cord clamping. You can skip that, bring the baby to the resuscitation table and do whatever procedure are required to revive the baby. Now, if the baby is started on this positive pressure respiratory support, and if the baby is requiring more and more oxygen in terms of FiO2 through the blender, you need to increase it. A situation may come where if the FiO2 increases to more than 30% in babies less than gestation of 28 weeks, or more than 40% in gestations of more than 28 weeks, surfactant would be required. But then this decision need not necessarily be taken in the delivery room, but then it needs to be thought of in the so-called first golden hour. So typically early surfactant is the way to go. Preferably in most units, if you were to give surfactant, you would even give it earlier, even within the first 2 hours, or some units like ours, we would even prefer to give it within the first 1 hour because that will benefit the baby. So this, I just mentioned it here. You don't have to necessarily give it in the delivery room, but this is part of the golden hour protocol. Now, while this is happening and you find it was an extremely low birth weight baby and the child is just not coming out of it, the 15-minute APGAR is less than 2, cardiac compressions have been done, and medications including adrenaline have been required, and still the child is not coming out. This is around the time for you to discuss with the parents before transporting to the SNCU or the nursery, whether it may be better to actively resuscitate further this child or better to talk about the poor prognosis of this baby to the parents, and then they decide what to do. Especially in the peri-viable ages, this is something. So if you see now, apart from the clinical care you need to do in this period, you need to be also counseling the parents parallelly. Maybe one of the team leaders can probably discuss with the parents and discuss while the team is still continuing the resuscitation. Now, if the baby is brought now to the labor room area where the baby neonatal corner, or is brought to the observation area or what you call the transition nursery in the labor room or near the labor room, the baby has to be monitored for tachypnea, grunting, and chest retractions while you're giving CPAP with the TP's resuscitator. You can even transport the baby to your nursery if you have the nursery in the same hospital. Or if you're waiting for transporting to another nursery, you can closely monitor this baby for the respiratory distress, which is worsening or decreasing. You have to decide that. Most of the times, if it's a baby who's a little better in gestation, it's likely that it could be a lot of water in the lung, what you call transient tachypnea of the newborn. These are disorders of transition. Many times it may settle down. So you may not have to necessarily plan to shift the baby to another NICU, especially if you don't have your NICU. Even in our own institutions where we have a tertiary care NICU, we would keep these babies even in the transition area, especially if they are what is called late preterm babies, monitor them for the respiratory distress closely, and then decide whether the baby needs to be shifted. So usually in the first golden hour, you get some good idea whether this baby is increasingly becoming tachypnic, whether the nasal flaring is worsening, the grunting is worsening, retractions, both intercostal and subcostal retractions are worsening, cyanosis and apnea is worsening. So like I pointed out earlier, while you're doing this, even in the labor room, you can see whether the oxygen needs are increasing or whether the respiratory distress is increasing. So all this time, you're keeping the CPAP or the positive pressure ventilation on because it improves the lung compliance of the child. It decreases the work of breathing. It prevents apnea from occurring, and it's some form of an assisted respiratory support you're giving to this baby. We are all fond of this Silverman-Anderson scoring, and this can be easily kept. You can put a chart of this in your labor room and even tell a resident doctor or a nurse to closely monitor. Any of these nurses who are very good in most of the SNCUs can monitor. They can see whether the respiratory distress score is increasing or decreasing. If the score becomes 3 or more, that baby definitely needs to be going to the NICU or SNCU for further treatment. Especially if it's a very busy SNCU or a NICU you can have a transition area where these babies can be monitored for the first 2-3 hours. Definitely in the first 1 hour, these babies have to be monitored. And then you have to decide whether the baby is going into an impending respiratory failure or is getting better. So typically, if you have a preterm baby or an early term baby, even early terms, mind you, gestations 37 to 39 weeks also, there is a good chance that babies can have respiratory distress, even if you think they are not really premature. For example, our own data, which we published 5 years back, suggested that 23% of the times babies who are early term babies, 37 to 39 weeks gestation, would also have respiratory distress needing NICU care. So you have a situation where the baby is tachypnic, grunting, good weight baby, late preterm or early term baby. You assess, don't let the baby go, monitor the baby with saturation, continue the positive respiratory support. If the baby gets better and better after 2-3 hours, then you can stop that and probably think that it was transient tachypnea of the newborn and shift the baby back to the mother's side. If the change has not been very substantial and you feel respiratory distress has been not very different or it's on the contrary increasing, you should probably think that the child has respiratory distress syndrome or hyaline membrane disease and the baby needs to go to the NICU. But of course, don't forget, many times in term babies, for that matter, even full-term babies, there could be meconium, there could be pneumonia. So you would need to keep a close watch. So the same protocol holds good even for full-term babies. Now, what are the significant therapeutic advantages we have had over the last 4 or 5 decades as far as respiratory therapy is concerned for babies? Gone are the days where we do a lot of invasive ventilation. Nowadays, most of the times we are doing what's called non-invasive ventilation. This last decade or so, most of the times we're concentrated on giving CPAP at birth and then shifting to high flow nasal cannula, or very rarely the children need to be ventilated. So much so that most of the times in NICUs like ours, our ventilators are lying unused, like this picture you can see. So we don't endotrachally intubate babies unless there is evidence of severe PPHN, meconium aspiration syndrome, or severe respiratory distress syndrome, prolonged apneas, or other things like hypoxic encephalopathy or congenital diaphragmatic hernia. We are all very, very aware now that the more you ventilate babies, they're likely to get damaged lungs. So if at all we need to ventilate, we ventilate with what is called cautious use of volume. So we do what's called volume cycle ventilation so that there is not much injury to the lung. And this is the way we do. So the paradigm shift this last decade has been that we do less invasive ventilation for babies, and therefore the motto nowadays is called less is more. So NNF guidelines, if you were to see last year, it was published online. It's called the Clinical Practice Guidelines. And it has very clearly mentioned that the CPAP is the primary respiratory support you should think of, or non-invasive ventilation as we call it in the NICU. So this is available online. I can share it with you if any of you wants it. And it's available on the NNF website. So this baby with respiratory distress you bring to the nursery or the NICU as you call it, a very wonderful investigation which has got a lot of diagnostic importance is to get a portable X-ray chest. If you see this kind of an X-ray with a well-expanded lung, you can see almost 10 to 11 rib spaces there. There's some fluid in the interlobar fissure. This is transient tachypnea of the newborn. Compare this to this X-ray, which is showing a complete whiteout. It's like the liver, almost the liver and the lung, you can hardly make out the difference. This is very classically suggestive of what is called respiratory distress syndrome or hyaline membrane disease. So if you see an X-ray like this, you will know that this baby is not going to get better over the next few hours. On the contrary, because of surfactant deficiency, the child is going to get worse, and you need to be able to decide whether to give surfactant and to ventilate this baby. This kind of a baby with a good respiratory support with CPAP, positive pressure ventilation, you may probably get away. In the next few hours, maybe this baby will settle down. Of course, you should not forget that other reasons for respiratory distress may occur, even in premature babies like pneumonitis. You can see this baby's picture here with pneumonia. You can have meconium aspiration as well. These are things we should not forget. So an X-ray becomes mandatory. The other is to assess the oxygenation and the carbon dioxide status of these babies. I do understand that blood gases, which is the gold standard, is not available at many places, especially in the periphery. But if it is available, it gives a very good assessment. You don't have to necessarily do arterial blood gases. In fact, in our own unit, most of the times, we do what's called arterialized capillary blood gases. We would just warm up the heel of the baby with about warm water, keep the heel dipped in warm water for about 5 minutes. Once there is a good blood circulation there, you try to do a heel prick sample with what is called a lancet, if it's available, and you take a capillary blood sample and you can send it for blood gas analysis. That gives you a very good analysis on the pH and the carbon dioxide. And of course, oxygenation, you have good pulse oximeters which are available. If you are able to do it, preferably do a preductal. This right hand is called the preductal pulse oximetry. And if you have two pulse oximeters, you can keep one on the foot as well. So that can tell you the difference between the preductal and the postductal. And that tells you whether there's any shunting or what is called severe pulmonary hypertension, or if there's any right to left shunting, it tells you probably the child needs more respiratory support or other drugs. Of course, non-invasive methods more and more are coming up, like endotracheal carbon dioxide or transcutaneous oxygenation. But these things may or may not be available in the near future for us in nurseries in the periphery. But what is definitely available is pulse oximetry today. So if you look at our own paper, which was presented at the American Pediatric Academic Society's meeting year before last, we have found, and that is published data elsewhere in the world also, that if you just have a pulse oximetry based, what is called oxygen saturation index, which is available, anybody, you can read on the internet how to calculate this OSI, you'll find that it gives a good prognostication of the baby's oxygenation status. If the OSI, as we call it, is increasing, then you need to know that the baby is going to respiratory failure. On the contrary, if it is getting better, you know that the baby is getting better. So this is something which non-invasively you can now measure the oxygenation status of babies. Of course, units like ours, and more so, I was talking to a pediatrician in the periphery in Bellary recently, He says he's got an ultrasound machine and he's trying to learn lung ultrasound now. So we don't necessarily need to have X-ray chest, which is portable, which if you have a lung ultrasound, if you see most obstetric units, will have an ultrasound machine. If you borrow it for some time in your transition nursery with just the same linear probe, it's not rocket science. Lung ultrasound is so simple to learn. All you need to do is assess whether the child has got extra water in the lung or is it hyaline membrane disease, and you're able to determine what next needs to be done for the baby. It can be done at the bedside. It can be repeatedly done. So this is something I would seriously request all of you, even in smaller centers in the periphery, in SNCUs, to learn this technology because the ultrasound machines are available. And if you get permission from the hospital administration to do what's called screening lung ultrasound, you can easily make out whether the child has got fluid or surfactant deficiency in the lungs and then decide the next course of action. So there's a good monitoring tool and extension of your clinical monitoring which can be done. So now suppose this baby is on CPAP, you're looking at a clinical improvement, respiratory distress settles down, the grunting settles down, the chest expansion is better. You start looking at the reduction in the respiratory distress score when the baby is on CPAP. These are the things you should monitor. And you start looking at whether the baby's oxygen requirement is decreasing or increasing. So the FiO2 with the blender is there for you. And nowadays, most units would have a bubble CPAP. I'm sure most of you have a CPAP device with you and you're watching and deciding. Blood gases, if you have facilities, fantastic. You can monitor the pH. The target pH is 7.25 to 7.35 and carbon dioxide about 40 to 60. A little permissive hypercapnia is fine as long as the pH is okay. You can do that and monitor. So the next step is you're now seeing, even if you want, you can repeat an X-ray or a lung ultrasound to see whether the lung is getting better or not. And over the next 1 or 2 hours, you decide whether this child is getting better, and therefore you need to de-escalate and probably think of shifting the baby to the mother side, especially in bigger children who are late preterms with a good weight of 2.5 kilos. These things may happen. Or on the contrary, obviously, if the baby is very small, less than, let's say, 1.7 kilo, you would need to keep the baby still in the NICU. You can also decide whether surfactant is required if the FiO2 increases to more than 40% and the respiratory distress is increasing in spite of CPAP going to more than 6 to 7 centimeters. So if you have to give surfactant, there are 2 techniques you do. I'm sure many of you in the SNCUs are giving surfactant now. Animal-derived surfactant is always, we call it the natural surfactant. These are the ones which are preferred. You can give it by the endotracheal tube, which I'm sure many of you are knowing and doing the procedure called the INSURE. You would intubate, give surfactant, and then extubate and put the baby back on CPAP. More and more of us are now going into a more non-invasive way of giving surfactant. It's called the LISA, or the less invasive surfactant administration. Of course, there is a certain learning curve. It takes for some time for a unit to get used to doing non-invasive. The child is still on CPAP and you give surfactant with a catheter directly visualizing the trachea and directly introducing the catheter into the trachea and giving that surfactant. Of course, you will see in the future, maybe the laryngeal mask airways and non-invasive modes of giving surfactant will come up, but that is for another day. We'll discuss it some other time. So if you have to give surfactant, even in the golden hour, it's better to give this. LISA is, of course, now data suggests is more superior to giving INSURE, but if you can't, please go ahead. Child needs surfactant, FiO2 is more than 40%, CPAP is high, more than 6 or 7 centimeters, retractions are worsening, and the X-ray is clearly showing there's a grade 4, what we call RDS, you have to give surfactant. It is definitely important, beneficial. So try to target within the first 1 or 2 hours or the golden hour, try to give the surfactant and monitor the baby soon after the surfactant. Sometimes redosing of surfactant is required. And the preparation of surfactant, which by evidence suggests is the poractin surfactant, but that is up to you. Whatever is available, any surfactant is good. Whatever is available with you, you can just use it to the benefit of the babies. This is just a picture to show you how you do LISA. You would probably give a little pre-medication. Remember, caffeine is an integral part of the golden hour management. because it reduces the risk of BPD, improves the work of breathing in these babies. So in premature babies, gestationally less than 34 weeks of gestation, while you're managing the child and have brought the baby to the NICU, I'll come to that later, you will need to probably start caffeine as well. So while you're maintaining the CPAP with probably just a little bit of pre-medication with atropine to reduce the secretions, or maybe a little analgesic like sucrose analgesia, you would probably give a catheter insertion into the trachea, and under direct laryngoscopic vision, you can give surfactant. Now, while you are giving surfactant, you will monitor for any hypoxemia. Surfactant refluxes can occur. The child can become bradycardic. And sometimes, because after giving surfactant, suddenly there's an improvement in the compliance of the lungs. You may have sudden pneumothorax, Ehrlich syndromes. So you have to be very, very careful after giving surfactant. And then, of course, you would need to ventilate these babies. Ideally, volume guarantee ventilation is what we would all prefer you to start. Once the child comes to the NICU, you can start volume guarantee with a volume of about 4 to 6 ml per kilo target of tidal volume. So after the surfactant, don't suction the endotracheal tube for at least an hour or two. And of course, you would have given caffeine either before or after the surfactant, preferably before the surfactant. If, of course, the CPAP fails and the child is not maintaining, and suppose, for example, you have done an INSURE technique, child doesn't maintain back on CPAP, before re-intubating or considering re-intubating, try to continue with the baby if possible on NIP modes or NIPP mode as we call it. Now, second dose of surfactant is of course not part of the golden hour, so I'll just skip this slide. So if you were to now see what all we had talked about, a baby is spontaneously breathing, gestations between, let's say 28, I'm not talking of the extreme preterm babies, 28 to 34 weeks, spontaneously breathing, increase in oxygen requirements are happening, the work of breathing is increasing, start CPAP right in the delivery room. FiO2 requires more than 30%, take the baby to the NICU and continue the CPAP. If the FiO2 keeps on increasing, you can probably think of giving the surfactant. Now, on the other hand, so just 1 minute, I seem to have lost my cursor. Yeah. On the other hand, the baby is not spontaneously breathing. You would need to resuscitate these babies, follow the protocols of NRP. If the baby needs intubation, once stabilized, you can give surfactant if the FiO2 goes to more than 30%. So this will be a kind of ideal algorithm for you to follow. Now you have this other situation where gestations are better, more than 34 weeks gestation, where the baby initially needs CPAP, then based on oxygen requirement, you can decide, and if the respiratory distress settles down in the 1 or 2 hours after birth, you can probably shift this baby back to the mother. But the same baby, if the FiO2 requirements are persistent or on the contrary increasing, the baby needs to be further planned for investigations. It could be TTNB also still. Sometimes TTNB can take about even 6 to 8 hours to settle down. You can have even other things in the lungs, like congenital anomalies could be there, spontaneous pneumothorax could be there. So don't ignore this. You may need to still get an X-ray done, and also other investigations may be required. Look for sepsis as well. This will all need to be decided in the first 1 or 2 hours after the baby is born. Of course, you can plan for giving surfactant even in late preterm babies, and of course, depending on the condition. Remember, late preterm babies have a higher incidence of pulmonary hypertension. So if a baby who's late preterm is increasingly becoming hypoxic, you need to keep that in mind, and you may have to get an echocardiogram done, preferably, or at least some kind of assessment yourself if it is possible. If you don't have a cardiologist issue, it will be very nice if you can do that. So what are the things subsequently you would need to plan for? Apart from stabilizing respiratory support, you will need to start fluids in the baby, you will need to keep the baby warm. You would have to probably insert IV lines, sometimes for umbilical arterial monitoring, you will need to insert lines. Antibiotics may need to be started, at least the first line antibiotics after taking appropriate cultures. Nutrition, you can even start early enteral nutrition. Parental nutrition, of course, you'll have to decide whether your unit would be in a kind of state of advanced intensive care facilities to be able to manage. But I don't insist, especially in babies who are not likely to be fed for a long time, let's say for 5 to 7 days, they can't reach their full feeds. We'll say probably you need to start parental nutrition immediately. I'm looking at, therefore, the extremely low birth weight babies in this situation. But as I see, most of you would have to concentrate on babies of more than 1 kilo, gestations of 27 weeks and above. So probably the best way to go would be to get mother's milk soon as possible or donor breast milk and start enteral nutrition soon as possible. Start with trophic feeds on day 1 and rapidly escalate it if the baby is tolerating even 20 to 30% escalations per day, you can do. So the key word here in respiratory support in preterms is to go non-invasive in the first golden hour all the time. And subsequent to giving this non-invasive respiratory support, if the respiratory drive is good, continue with CPAP. If the respiratory drive is not good, you can give NIV, which is non-invasive ventilation with a ventilator. You can give respiratory breaths per minute, let's say maybe about 30 to 40 breaths a minute. And subsequently, you can decide whether the child really needs to be given surfactant or not. And the baby, after surfactant also, you need to decide whether the baby needs to be continued on ventilation or can be extubated and continued on CPAP. So if I was to summarize the other supports to be given for this baby in the nursery, I would say this is the whole chart which I want to discuss, which I have already shared with you. The other supportive treatment is to continue the caffeine up to even gestations of 34 weeks. You can start with a loading dose of caffeine of even 20 mg per kilo in the initial period in the first golden hour. Nutritional support, as I discussed, try to restrict fluids. Less fluids is always better in the initial 24 to 48 hours. Temperature control, maintain euthermia in the baby, avoid hyperthermia as well. And antibiotics, first line would need to be given. If the child is if you find the blood culture is growing something, you'll probably need to escalate the antibiotic or try to redefine the antibiotic according to the cultures. Now, basically the golden hour principles is what I have delineated in the last few slides. It essentially works on effectively communicating with each other, working together, both the obstetric anesthesia team and the neonatal team. And there are lots of protocols which need to be standardized in your own unit. Lots of checklists are there. I've just given an overall overview of what all things need to be brought as a bundle together. You need to develop the skills of each team member and try to even do simulations and try to see how to refine this golden hour care in our own unit. So I'll be very happy to answer any questions at the end of this lecture. Again, we keep saying the same thing. Neonatal care is dependent a lot on team approach, and especially this team approach is most exemplified and reinforced, and the benefits of this is seen only in the acute emergency of the first golden hour care of these premature. I think it just puts our resources to maximal kind of stress when we have to look after a premature baby in the first 1 or 2 hours. So the principles remain the same, which again and again I have talked about: temperature maintenance, respiratory support, and of course, all this while you have to make sure infection prevention and treatment is to be done. So I will probably close this session here, and I will suggest we can take some questions, Iboli, if that is possible. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for accepting an invitation and then delivering such an important and informative presentation. I'm sure everyone that is present here would agree to that.